At the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion on April 15th, 1971, not long after my 8th birthday, the Academy Awards for the films of 1970 were held. The five films up for Best Picture were Patton, MASH, Five Easy Pieces, Airport, and Love Story. By the night of the Oscars, I had seen all five, obviously at the theater. And the film I was rooting for, MASH, I saw three times. I saw practically every big movie that year. To illustrate how these movies were molding my taste, in 1968, my favorite movie was The Love Bug. In 1969, my favorite movie was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But by 1970, my favorite movie was MASH, an anarchist-themed military sex comedy. Nothing made me laugh harder than Hot Lips, Sally Kellerman, being exposed in the shower. Or Radar, Gary Berghoff, placing the microphone under the bed as Hot Lips and Frank Burns fucked. Then Trapper John, Elia Gould, broadcasting it throughout the camp. However, the whole middle section with Painless, the camp dentist going through homosexual panic never meant anything to me. Of course not. It's the lousiest part of the film. Again, while I really enjoyed MASH, part of the delight I had watching it was sitting in a cinema full of adults laughing hysterically, all getting off on their own naughtiness. Not to mention the fun I had going back to school and describing those scenes to the other kids in my class, who could never have dreamed of seeing a movie like MASH, or The French Connection, or The Godfather, or The Wild Bunch, or Deliverance. There was usually one other kid allowed to see some of the wild shit I saw. Because I was allowed to see things the other kids weren't, I appeared sophisticated to my classmates. And because I was watching the most challenging movies of the greatest movie-making era in the history of Hollywood, they were right. I was. I asked my mom about it. She said, "Quentin, I worry more about you watching the news. A movie's not going to hurt you."
Okay, my next one is one you guys don't think, I'm guessing you probably never heard of before. I hadn't heard of it until I went into, I heard about it 10 years ago. I got into a whole big thing about examining the movies of 1970, that the year 1970. And I've kind of made it a point to try to watch as many movies from that year as I possibly could, and not just American movies, from like all over the world, just to look at cinema at that year. And I discovered a film that I thought was really terrific for a lot of different reasons. One's a good movie, but also for a few other aspects of it. But one of the things about that year was that was a year that a lot of directors, a lot of the old world Hollywood directors had made their last movies. And many of them don't work, all right? Whether it's William Wyler's The Liberation of L.B. Jones, which I kind of appreciate. I don't think it really works, but there's a part of it that to me does work. I'll talk about what I can defend about it later. But Liberation of L.B. Jones, George Stevens, the only game in town. But one director is the director Anton Ludwig, who's done all kinds of movies. He did Confessions of a Nazi Spy with Edward G. Robinson. He did the original Mayerling with Charles Boyer in France. He directed for I think he did Anastasia. He directed for years and years and years and years and years. His last movie is a British thriller based on a French novel with one of the best titles of all time. The title is called A Girl in a Car with Glasses and a Gun. It sounds like a Claude Lelouch movie. It sounds like a movie that would be on the marquee of a theater in a Claude Lelouch movie.
I love
that. And it stars Samantha Eggar and Oliver Reed.
Oh, okay.
And it's a story about Samantha Eggar is Oliver Reed's secretary, and I believe her. It's the kind of story I want to play down the plot synopsis a little bit, because part of it is kind of watching it unfold. But the idea is that she's Oliver Reed's secretary, and her job is to I think drive his car from one area of France to another. And in the course of her trip, she just decides to kind of go on a little existential journey of her own. Because she has the weekend. She decides, as opposed to doing what she's supposed to do by just dropping the car, she just decides to take a road trip, during the weekend. And that leads to a really mysterious situation. She meets this kind of weird guy on the road, and he seems kind of shady. And it just, it becomes this kind of weird genre thing. Now, what's interesting, and it's a mystery, and then finally it's all eventually revealed later in one of those really kind of cool where the character now tells you everything that you've watched. And now you see the entire movie again from this different perspective that explains everything that's happened up until this point in time. But it's very much playing with genre. I mean, even the title makes that clear. A girl in a car with glasses and a gun. These are the elements in the movie that they're dealing with. Now, in the book, it's obviously almost kind of meant to be a meta reference to kind of pulp fiction kind of a pulp fiction kind of paperback kind of idea, kind of like, it knows it's a pulp fiction paperback, and it's kind of playing with that idea. But what's really, really interesting, especially compared to how completely, how obvious a lot of these, I mean, especially Anton Lubick, who was making movies in the 30s, how out of touch a lot of these directors seem by that time. You have to remember, A Girl in a Car with Glasses and a Gun came out the same year as Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Yeah.
So that's Dario Argento's first film. And with that film, and the titles almost are, they both have that same kind of ironic, poetic, pulpiness about them. But as we all know, that's the film that officially started the giallo genre. So Argento, a young director, starts the giallo genre with Bird with the Crystal Plumage. A Girl in a Car with Glasses and a Gun is pretty much a giallo. It's like they're very, the plot lines, but they're very similar. They're like, if it came out the next year, it would be considered a giallo. If it was directed by an Italian director, it would absolutely be considered a giallo. So the idea of a young director like Argento starting this new genre, this new type of murder mystery, this new type of horror film, it's all about it's about the newness and the hipness of it all. And then a director who's been making movies since the 30s is making his last movie, and it fits into that progressive kind of thing. There's nothing old about it at all. It's so fresh. It's so much fun. When I did a festival, I did a screening of a bunch of 70s movies, movies from 1970, at a festival called Leon, which it's run by the people who do the Cannes Film Festival, but it's for classic cinema. And I put on a double feature, A Girl in a Car with Glasses and a Gun and Bird with the Crystal Plumage on the same double feature. And both movies played like gangbusters together. They played great.
Nice.
And I think it's one of the finds of the, it was one of the ones I wanted to introduce on this podcast of all of them, because it's the one I think most people don't know about. No, but because now actually Columbia made it. Columbia has a print, but I've never actually. I've always wanted to make a big deal of it, so we've never shown it at the New Bev. But Columbia does have a print. But actually, I'm dealing with Sony right now about re-releasing it on Blu-ray. And they actually did because it's based on a French novel. They actually did a French remake of it about 6 or 7 years ago.
Crazy.
Which I've never seen.
Wow.
But the Anton Lubick one, and Samantha Egger is terrific in it. Oliver Reed is wonderful as per usual. It's a real find. It's a real find. I'm talking about starting kind of inspired a little bit by like the Twilight Time Blu-rays. I'm talking with Sony about coming out with a Blu-ray line.
Whoa!
Nice.
Some
of their from their catalog, and one of the ones we want to start off our run with is A Lady in a Car with Glasses and a Gun. I think it would be called Tarantino Archives.
Love it.
Oh God, I hadn't even. I hadn't thought that. Yeah, but when they did The Brood, that there was like a reunion.
Hello, this is Quentin Tarantino, and you're watching Tarantino Takes Over Weekend on Sky Indie. Coming up next is actually one of the best movies that has like a two-director team in the film, is the film Performance, directed by both Donald Cammell and Nicholas Rhodes. This film is one of the greatest rock movies of all time, and one of the best films that deals with this period, all right, this kind of Carnaby Street psychedelic things slightly starting to go wrong, all right, the way that, Woodstock gave over to Altamont. This is the bad side of the psychedelic 60s dream. Basically from 1970 on, you started seeing the bad sides of stuff. This is a terrific movie. One of the things I've always loved about this film, though, is James Fox's performance in the film. One of the things that's really interesting to me is he actually gives my favorite British gangster performance of that type. And what's really interesting is I read an interview with James Fox where, his accent, everything is perfect, but I read an interview with James Fox where he said that he didn't know anybody like this. This was a complete, figment of his imagination, how he built the character. But it actually is one of the best British gangster Cockney killers in the history of cinema.
Well, you should see the motor.
See the what?
My motor. We had a little argument with a cement wall on the way up from Dover.
So stay tuned for Mick Jagger and James Fox in Donald Cammell, very sad, tragic Donald Cammell, and Nicholas Rhodes' performance.
It's old England. Wasted on the young, wasted on the young, wasted on the young, wasted on the young.
That same year, at the age of 7, I first attended a show at the Tiffany when my mother, Connie, and my stepfather, Kurt, took me to see a double feature. John G. Albertson's Joe and Carl Reiner's Where's Papa? Wait a minute. You saw a double feature of Joe and Where's Papa at 7? You bet I did. And while that was a memorable screening, hence I'm writing about it now, for me at the time, it was hardly culture shock. If we go by author Mark Harris's timeline, the beginning of the New Hollywood Revolution was 1967. Then my first years of going to see movies at the theater, I was born in 63, coincided with the beginning of the Revolution, 67. The Cinematic Revolutionary War, 68 through 69, and the year the Revolutionary War was won, 1970, which was the year New Hollywood became the Hollywood. Albertson's Joe made quite a splash when it was released in 1970. It was an undeniable influence on Taxi Driver. Unfortunately, in the last 50 years, this powder keg of a picture has kind of faded away. The film tells the story of a distraught upper-middle-class father, played by Dennis Patrick, who loses his daughter, Susan Sarandon, in her motion picture debut, to the hippie drug culture of the era. While visiting the disgusting pad his daughter shares with her scumbag junkie boyfriend, Patrick ends up bashing his head in. She's not there. While sitting in a tavern, trying to come to grips with both the violence and the crime he committed, he meets a racist, loudmouth, blue-collar, hard-hat worker named Joe, played in a star-making performance by Peter Boyle. Joe is sitting at the bar, drinking his beer after work, carrying on a profanity-filled America love it or leave it rant about hippies, black folks, and society circa 1970 in general.
They get all that welfare money. They even get free rubbers. You think they use them?
Nobody in the working-class tavern is paying attention to him. The bartender even tells him, obviously not for the first time, Joe, give us all a break.
They sell the rubbers. And then they use the money to buy booze.
Joe's diatribe ends with the sentiment that somebody ought to kill them all. The hippies. Well, Patrick just did. And in an unguarded moment, makes a barroom confession that only Joe hears. What follows is the strangely antagonistic, yet symbiotic relationship between the two different men from two different classes. They're not exactly friends. Joe's practically blackmailing the anguished father. But in a black comic twisted way, they do become compadres. The distinguished middle-class man of the executive class has enacted the fascistic rants of this low-class, blue-collar, loudmouth slob. By blackmailing Patrick into sort of an alliance, Joe shares both the murderer's dark secret and, to some degree, the culpability of the murder. This dynamic unleashes the desires and inhibitions of the blue-collar blowhard and buries the cultured man's guilt, replacing it with a sense of purpose and righteousness, till the two men, armed with automatic rifles, are executing hippies at a commune. And in a tragic, ironic freeze frame, the father ends up executing his own daughter. Pretty strong stuff? You bet. But what that synopsis can't begin to convey is how fucking funny the film is. As harsh and ugly and violent as the movie Joe is, at its heart, it's a kettle black comedy about class in America, bordering on satire, while also being savagely vicious. Blue-collar, upper-middle class, and youth cultures are represented by their worst surrogates. Every male character in the film is a loathsome cretin. Today, it might be controversial to even refer to Joe as a black comedy, but it sure wasn't when it was first released. At the time I saw Joe, it was easily the ugliest movie I'd seen, a spotted hell till I saw The Last House on the Left. Frankly, it was the squalor of the apartment the two junkies at the beginning lived in that creeped me out the most. In fact, it made me a little sick to my stomach. Even the rendering of the junkies' apartment in the Mad Magazine spoof made me a little ill. And the audience at the Tiffany Theater in 1970 watched the early section of the film in silence. But once Dennis Patrick enters the tavern and Peter Boyle's Joe enters the movie, the audience started laughing. And in no time at all, the adult audience went from repulsed repose to outright hilarity. I remember they laughed pretty much every fucking thing Joe said.
A little on the side once in a while.
Once in a while.
It was a superior laugh. They were laughing at Joe, but they were laughing with Peter Boyle, who enters the movie like a force of nature. And the talented screenwriter, Norman Wexler, gives them a bunch of outrageous lines.
They look like a bunch of f***s. Not really f***s, but close. You remember how you felt in the war sometimes? After you killed a few of them? You feel bad and you feel good at the same time?
She was wondering what you was going to talk about. I told her you was both women.
That's right. We're all alike.
Boyle's comedic performance alleviates the picture's one-note ugliness. It doesn't make Joe likable, but it does make him sort of enjoyable. Alvinson, by combining Peter Boyle's bravura comic performance with this grim trashologue, produces a cocktail mixed with piss that's disturbingly tasty. Joe saying fucked up shit is a crack-up. Like with Freebie and the Bean a few years later, audiences might feel guilty for laughing, but I'm here to tell you, laugh they did. Even 7-year-old little me laughed. Not because I understood what Joe was saying or was appreciating Norman Wexler's dialogue. I laughed for 3 reasons. 1, the room full of adults were laughing. 2, even I was able to plug into the comic vibe of Boyle's performance. And 3, because Joe cursed all the time, and there's few things funnier to a little kid than a funny guy cursing up a storm. I remember just as it seemed the laughter in the tavern scene had started to calm down, Joe gets up from the bar stool and moves over to the jukebox to drop some coins in. And as soon as he gets a look at all the, I assume, soul music on the jukebox's playlist, he yells out, "Christ, they even fucked up the goddamn music!" The audience at the Tiffany Theater burst out laughing even harder than before. But after the bar scene was over, and sometime after Dennis Patrick and his wife go over to Joe's house for dinner, I fell asleep. So I missed the whole scene where Joe and his newfound acolyte go on a hippie hunting murder spree. A fact my mother was thankful for. On the ride home that night, I remember my mother telling Kurt, "I'm glad Quint fell asleep before the end. I wouldn't have wanted him to see that ending." In the back seat, I asked, "What happened?" Kurt filled me in on what I missed. "Well, Joe and the father ended up shooting a bunch of hippies, and in the mess, the father ended up shooting his daughter." "The girl hippie from the beginning?" I asked. "Yes." "Why did he shoot her?" I asked. "Well, he didn't mean to shoot her," he told me. Then I asked, "Was he sad?" And my mother said, "Yes, Quentin, he was very sad." Well, I might have slept through the second half of Joe, but once the movie was over and the lights came on, I woke up. And in no time at all, the second movie on the Tiffany double feature started. The more overtly comic Where's Papa?
Wasted on the young, wasted on the young, wasted on the young, wasted on the young, wasted on the young.
Managed his library in a big, big way. And, you know, I'm sure pretty much every mom and pop video store had at least a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
The only ones he didn't have is he didn't have a Beyond the Valley of the Dolls because
it's Fox.
Fox had that. So like a tape that we were very, very, very precious about was Russ Meyer's Beyond the Valley of the Dolls because it was out of print.
Yeah.
So I think at a certain point we required like a $200 deposit just to rent it because if you lost it, it could never be replaced, and it was worth that much. So we had to either have a $200 thing on your credit card or a $200 in cash deposit for you to rent it. Then you get it back. All right, but like it was like it can't be replaced.
The sweet smell of clover won't make the world over.
Russ Meyer, Bradley Metzger were actually getting like legit theatrical engagements of their movies in regular movie theaters. Now, to let it be known, I'm a huge fan of Russ Meyer and especially an incredible fan of his technique. I do not appreciate as much when he delved more into camp as he did. He died headfirst into camp. And you know, Russ Meyer does exist in that world of George Romero, where these actors appear that you don't expect to see in other movies. And I doubt Russ Meyer ever used a woman with a boob job in her life. In his life, they all had to be
That's not his
absolute
MO.
100% pure.